The theme for this week is entertainment. And yeah, music is a form of entertainment, but it's so much more. Music is a form of art and an expression of identity and culture. It's an attitude. It's a way of life. For those of you that think it's entertainment, maybe I can change your mind tonight. So, you know, I'm a very passionate person when it comes to this subject, and I actually struggled to prepare this lesson because, I've been growing up with music. I used to play the guitar. I grew up playing the guitar. I play the piano. I've been a songwriter of sorts. I've been writing my own music. So, I got into songwriting through learning to play the guitar and learning to play other people's music on the guitar. Realized it wasn't for me. But the musical, amusement, right. Hi, Outsider. There's so many ways to produce music nowadays. If you've got an iPad or a computer, you don't necessarily need to have a musical instrument or to know anything about music theory. You can just kind of play around, experiment with different kinds of sounds. So I've also got a background in music production and quite a bit of music theory. I understand the subject very well, but it's difficult to explain it to you guys in 1 hour. So my goal, anyway, with all of these lessons is to give you practical vocabulary when it comes to having a discussion on the topic of music. I've selected 24 key words here, and we will look at their definitions in just a moment, and you'll see these words kind of come up throughout the lesson. We have 2 videos. So my goal for you guys, not to overwhelm you with information, is to just give you a quick little introduction on musical vocabulary. And if we do come back to this topic later, we can build on it and we can talk about individual musical genres and their history, or, what are their defining characteristics. In other words, like what separates a piece of classical music from modern day dance music is the instrumentation and the tempo. So classical music is much slower and it's played on traditional instruments, and its structure, a piece of classical music can last a few minutes to an hour, I suppose. So, whereas dance music really follows a very rigid formula. It should be between 4 and 6 minutes. It needs to have a steady beat. It's very much rhythmically or percussively oriented. If there's no beat, it's not dance music. It's not if it's not electronic sounding, it's not modern day dance music. So part of the instrumentation, part of the song structure, the the key, it's like harmonic range, I guess, is what defines a genre of music. Same thing between like blues and rock. Usually done with a 5-piece band using guitars and electric guitars, but the song structure and the tempo is different. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you will in a moment. We'll be looking at what is music, a very general definition of it, and how it affects us. In other words, like music has been a part of our species evolution. In other words, we communicate with language, and language evolved. Music has evolved along with our language. Music probably came before language. In other words, before we had our complicated verbal way of speaking to each other, we most likely bonded as little groups, making chanting sounds and dancing and percussive sounds with different kinds of drums, I suppose. So music is very, very old, and it's what, I don't know, it's like we are a social species. We live in groups. We live in families. And without technology what is left for us to kind of bond and communicate with each other? What's left when we don't have TV and we don't have our computers, and it's just a group of people gathering together? What are they going to do? Talking is very boring, I think. They're probably going to chant and sing and dance and have a good time that way. So think about it that way. Like, music is a form of entertainment for personal reasons, like the invention of the headphones, the ear pods that we wear on our ears, is fairly new and recent. If you wanted to enjoy music even 20 years ago, it was played on the radio. Well, yeah, the CD player and the Walkman tape player with the headphones that people wore is a very recent invention. Music used to be a collective group type of experience. And even before the recordings, it was performed by groups of people. So if you wanted to listen to music, you either had to play it yourself, or you had to go somewhere and listen to somebody else play it. And now we have recorded music, and we have music played on headphones, where it is a personal form of entertainment. But it wasn't originally intended as such. It was more of a social activity. So music is cultural, a cultural activity. It's what keeps groups cohesive. It's what helps people bond together. It's deeper than verbal language, as I'll try to explain. How does music affect us? The evolution of music and the different musical genres, and finally, different kinds of musical instruments. So looking at the worksheet again, now we have 16 people. Welcome. The first word is bass. B-A-S-S. Bass. Think of bass as the kick drum, the boom boom sound, or the low rumbly sound. You have a frequency range of sound. The sound that we hear with our ears, we hear a range of sound from low to high. Bass is the low end. A beat. We're talking about rhythm and percussion, and tempo and things like that. The speed of a music. Like, music is all about patterns of sound. You can have melodic instrumental music. You can also have just percussive music that only has a beat. We can enjoy listening to drummers without any sort of melodic content. The beat is the pattern. So it's like the boom bap. A chord. So a note is a single sound or a tone, and a chord is when you have more than one note played simultaneously. The video will probably explain this better. Classical, it's a kind of style of music. Traditional classical, the old conventional form of music played in bands, orchestras. A composition, this is what we call a piece of music. a written piece of music. A concert is where you go to enjoy a performance. Electronic, so a lot of the traditional instruments have been replaced by electronic emulations or sampled instruments or synthesized instruments, all done electronically. A genre, a style, you'll get to know that later. Harmony, well, when you have a sequence of notes, a tone, like happy birthday to you, that's a melody. You have a sequence of notes. When you have two or more notes played together, that's a chord. And when you have two or more notes played together in a pleasing way, you have what is called harmony. So when you have two people singing together, they could be singing the same note, and that is like a unison, or they could be singing at different intervals. Somebody could be singing higher or lower, depending on how many notes, higher or lower, gives you the harmony. And that's really, that's the most exciting part of music, is when you have like layers of musical elements, you know, more than one instrument. One instrument is capable of producing these harmonies, and then you can combine them endlessly. So an instrumental, you can have vocal music. The last word is vocal music, where it's really just the musical arrangement is there to accompany the vocalist, and the vocalist is taking the leading role in terms of presenting the melody. Everything that the band or the accompaniment is doing is to reinforce the vocalist. And then you have instrumental music where there's just no vocalist. Karaoke, KTV. Lyrics. This is what we refer to as the words, the spoken words of a piece of music. The melody, the sequence of notes. You'll get to understand that when the video comes on. Modern versus classical. Classical music was the established musical convention before the modern day. We live in the modern day right now. So there are more possibilities. We have more freedom to play with musical arrangement. Whereas in the classical day, of course, there were a lot of possibilities, but you had to really stay within a preset structure or framework. It was very you weren't allowed to experiment a whole lot until the end of the classical period. Experimental music is like music that breaks the conventional rules, the structure. When you break that too much, it's not music anymore, it's just sound and noise, like the sound of the cars driving outside. It's not music. Some people say that it could be, right? That's up to interpretation. But can a group of people gather together and listen to a recording of traffic? Probably not. Like music is when a group of people can understand and appreciate and really feel what a particular message, that a feeling that music gives you. I don't think you can get any kind of feeling from listening to the sound of noise, whatever it may be. Rhythm, like the beat, you can have different time signatures, like 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, I suppose, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just think about it that way. Like the measure, whether it's 4 or 3 or 6 or 8, there's going to be a downbeat at the beginning, and the the backbeat, I guess, which is second or the third note beat. Anyway, not going to talk too much about that today. But rhythm. A song is what we refer to as a piece of music. Sound is what we hear with our ears. Tempo is speed. You can have slow music. and very fast music. Traditional, this is music that predates the classical. Folk music. So, classical music is sort of like where traditional music was at its peak in terms of popularity. And everyone was really trying to write music for the symphony, for the orchestra, following the classical conventions. Traditional music is older, maybe simpler, and we can still enjoy that today. Is that right? Now we have 15. Right. What is music? An art form, a cultural activity whose medium is sound. So, painting, calligraphy is a visual medium. Storytelling and writing and poetry, somewhere between the two, I guess. It's linguistic. Music can be played by a solo musician or by an ensemble, a band. The basic elements of music, if you want to study it, are pitch, melody, harmony, and rhythm. So another general definition of music is vocal and or instrumental sounds that are pleasing and harmonious. Don't be confused by music that tries to be unpleasing and makes you nauseous. That's just entertainment. Music that actually makes you feel well, it's pleasing to the ear and to the body, that's music. Everything else is just commercial, consumerist entertainment to temporarily make you feel important. Pitch. The frequency from low to high. The quality of sound governed by the rate of vibrations. It's pretty scientific. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. Melody, the sequence of notes that is musically satisfying. The video will explain that. Harmony, combination of notes played simultaneously. Producing a pleasing effect, concordance. There are, different intervals from C to D, to C to E, C to F, C to G, C to A, C to B. And when you combine two or more notes together, you produce, scientifically, the frequencies, the way they interfere with each other, produce a kind of a vibration that it just produces a strong psychological effect. Feeling and rhythm, the repeated pattern. So, here are some quotes. Music is a piece of art that goes in the ears and straight to the heart. Music speaks what cannot be expressed, soothes the mind, and gives it rest, heals the heart, and makes it whole, flows from the heaven to the soul. I wish I knew who wrote that. The function of music is to release us from the tyranny of conscious thought. I wish I knew who wrote that. The tyranny of conscious thought. In other words, the rational thinking that we engage in our working lives is only part of us. There's another deeper side that we don't really get to understand and enjoy except through art and music. So let's watch this video here.
Music has been an important part of every human culture, both past and present. It can play a part in brain development, learning, mood, and even your health. There used to be a popular belief that music is processed in the right hemisphere of our brains, along with art and other creative activities. However, recent findings show us that music is distributed throughout the brain. Through studies of people with brain damage, we have seen patients who have lost the ability to read a newspaper but can still read music, or individuals who can play the piano but lack motor coordination to button their own sweater. Today we know that music listening and performance engage nearly every area of the brain that we have so far identified. One of the most common effects music has is that it can alter our mood and feelings by stimulating the formation of certain brain chemicals. Film directors use music to tell us how to feel about scenes that otherwise might be unclear or elevate our feelings at particularly dramatic moments. Think of a typical fight scene in an action film. It's the music that truly makes the scene epic. Also, our brains respond differently to happy and sad melodies. One study showed that after hearing a short piece of sad music, participants were more likely to interpret the neutral expression as sad. And if the melody was happy, the neutral expression was perceived as a happy one. Now, when you listen to music you actually like, your brain releases a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical which causes a feeling of satisfaction. When listening to your favorite part of the song, you'll get the same sort of pleasure that you experience when eating food, doing drugs, or having sex. So basically, music can make us feel good. And if you're having a particularly good day, listening to some of your favorite upbeat music can actually amplify that feeling of happiness. One interesting thing is that when someone is sad, they often reach for sad music and they find that it helps them feel better. Now you might be thinking, why would they do that? Why wouldn't a sad person listen to happy music? The reason is that when you're sad or depressed, you usually feel misunderstood, like the people around you don't understand you. If you would listen to happy music in this state, it would only contribute to this feeling of detachment. However, if you put on the right piece of sad music, you say to yourself, "Oh, that's how I feel. This musician understands me." So the sad music turns out to be soothing, unlike the happy music when you're feeling down. Another interesting aspect is how listening to music can affect our exercise regime. As our body realizes we are tired and wants to stop exercising, it sends signals to the brain to stop for a break. Listening to music competes for our brain's attention and can help us override those feelings of fatigue. A 2012 study showed that cyclists who listened to music required 7% less oxygen to do the same work as those who cycled in silence. So not only can we push through the pain and exercise longer and harder when we listen to music, but it can actually help us use our energy more efficiently. In the last few decades, neuroscientists have made enormous breakthroughs in understanding how our brains work by monitoring them with instruments like fMRI. So when researchers got the participants to listen to music, they saw multiple regions light up. But what's more interesting is that when they observed brains of musicians while playing an instrument, the whole brain lit up like sky with fireworks. So while listening to music engages some interesting brain regions, playing music is the brain's equivalent of a full body workout. Also, through brain scans, we have found that musicians have different brains than non-musicians. People who play an instrument have bigger, better connected, more sensitive brains. A study from 2008 showed that children who had at least 3 years of instrumental music training performed better than their non-musical counterparts on a variety of tests, mainly in auditory discrimination abilities and fine motor skills. But they also tested better on vocabulary and non-verbal reasoning skills, which involve understanding and analyzing visual information, such as identifying relationships, similarities and differences between shapes and patterns. These two areas in particular are quite removed from musical training as we imagine it, so it's fascinating to see how learning to play an instrument can help kids develop such a wide variety of important skills. It's also never too late to start learning an instrument.
Okay, we'll leave it there. So the benefits of listening to music. It can be therapeutic. In other words, it can help you to overcome painful emotions. It can also be therapeutic, helping people with degenerative brain conditions as well, and growing children. If you give your children music lessons, they will learn faster because they will be able to think in different ways. Anyone can begin to learn music, learn an instrument. It takes a few years, but the benefits that you get along the way are going to be improved cognitive function, I think. And listening to music, as we kind of saw what the scientists have seen in doing the image scanning of people who listen to music while they're listening to music, there's just more brain activity, more electrical activity happening up there. Okay, so music has been made for hundreds of thousands of years. The earliest form of tribal music may have been rhythmic chanting, percussion, and dance. As societies evolved, new instruments were invented, leading to the growth of musical genres. Different musical styles have different qualities of these basic elements: rhythm, instrumentation, harmonic and melodic structure, and other things. What distinguishes a piece of music from the sound or noise is how these elements are structured or arranged into a song. And different cultures have different standards. Like our modern day culture has a much more open-minded set of standards of what a musical arrangement should be. In the Western tradition, music can be studied and understood by applying music theory. Knowledge to a song to understand how and why it sounds pleasing. With the creation and evolution of music notation and the diatonic scales, songwriters or composers were able to capture their musical ideas for themselves and for other performers. And what we see here is an example of what the early musical notation used to look like. Musical notation symbols enable performers to replay and interpret the musical composition. For example, the composer can specify the tempo or the speed and the key signature where the root note is. The harmonic structure, is it going to be a major or minor key? Is it going to have a happy or sad feeling to it? Articulation, which notes are to be played loudly and quietly. All of these symbols in the music notation. And this is just a kind of a poster looking at all of the different relationships, all of the different symbols. Maybe we can do this in another lesson. Up until the invention of the record player, music could only be enjoyed as a live performance. In other words, the music was played and you got to hear it, and when the music was finished playing, that piece of music was gone forever until it was replayed, but it was replayed differently. The first musical recording device, called the phonograph, was first invented in 1887 and became, popularized in the 1940s. This is when, every household had a record player and some records, listening to military marching music or some classical compositions, or maybe some spoken word, some speeches. Nowadays, people can enjoy genres from any age, from the very beginning all the way up until the latest cutting edge artists on Spotify or whatever. Traditional to classical, more modern and popular styles of music. There's a little niche for every person. And music is an expression of culture. A person's musical preference can play an important role in how they choose to live their lives. Okay, I'm going to show you another video, just two, but this one's important, and then we'll move on from this. How music works.
Have you ever wondered how music really works? When we listen to music, it sounds so pure and simple, and we get it right away. But when we ask the innocent question of how this all works and how these songs are made in the first place, things get complicated very quickly. Key signatures, scales, sharps, flats, double sharps, chord symbols. But let's put all of these names and labels aside for one moment, and let's explore what's really going on in music in a much simpler way. Musical sounds can have any pitch on an infinite continuum. But we don't use all of these infinite sounds. We use just 12 sounds. What many people never fully appreciate is that these are all the notes that exist. All those music theory books, all your music teachers in school, the centuries of classical composers, all the way up to modern music like pop, rock, funk, blues, and jazz. It's all made from just 12 notes. And these 12 sounds are repeated across the musical continuum. All of these notes are equally separated, and they're all exactly equal in value and importance. And actually it gets even simpler, because most of the time our music is really only using 7 of these notes. And that note at the top that your ear is expecting to hear is not actually a new note at all, but it's just note 1 again, just 1 octave higher than the original. This is the major scale, and these are the sounds that make up all of that music that surrounds you in your daily life. Now, hearing the major scale in this way might make you think about children's songs like this one. But look at what else you find here. Melodies from pop music like the Beatles. Movie themes. Jazz standards like the classic Summertime. And even the most dark and melancholy ballads like My Funny Valentine. Melodies you know from classical music. And even melodies from rock music that don't sound anything like the major scale, like this classic from Nirvana. The first step to understanding these songs is to realize that the names of the notes don't even really matter, because music is relative. Every one of these melodies is just a sequence of notes from the major scale, and we can build a major scale anywhere we want. We could build it here, or we could build it here, and that means that we can also play any song we know anywhere we want. For example, we could play this melody here. Or we could move the entire system to a new place and play the melody here. So when you're connected with the origin of these sounds, which is always just the major scale, it's very easy to play any song in any key because you're not hampered by all that language about sharps and flats and key signatures and everything else. And this is the answer to our riddle about why music looks so complicated on paper, but it sounds so simple and so beautiful to our ears. The reason music feels so intuitive and enjoyable is because it all comes from a single musical structure called the major scale.
Hi there. So when I mentioned the diatonic scale, that is the major scale. You have, I think, 12 notes separated by tones and semitones. The major scale follows the pattern tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, and you can play that at any. You can play that starting at any point on the keyboard on the fretboard, and there are different there are different scale patterns, like the minor, which is, I think, tone, semitone, I believe. Anyway, so music is relative. Within a scale, you might have 7 notes, you might have 5 notes, you might have maybe more than 7 notes. You can add notes to the scale, and when you just stay within that structure, within that pattern, I guess, you have a musical genre. Or you have part of a musical genre. Classical, jazz, Latin blues, traditional, country, hip hop. So if somebody asks you, what kind of music do you like? What kind of music do you listen to? What kind of music do you really prefer? You might not know what all the names of the genres are. Some people really like energetic and happy, uplifting music. Some people prefer more relaxed, calming music. Some people like the strange sounding experimental music. Some people really like sad and angry music. It says here, across 18 countries, 64% of people like the pop music, which is usually the very sweet sounding, either happy or sad, love songs sung by a singer or a group of singers. So it's very much vocal music. Rock, which is probably a little bit more instrumental in that, the vocal aspect of the music is quite important, but in pop music it's not as important. The vocalist really is the star of the show, whereas in rock music it's more about the singer-songwriter, the group that can play music well together. And it tends to be a little bit more, I don't know, less sweet sounding and more aggressive, maybe angrier, or it's hard to put one. I would say maybe it's gritty. It has a gritty sound to it, almost a dirty sound. Whereas pop music is very sweet and clean sounding and well polished. Rock music is far more gritty and distorted sounding. We got dance and electronic. So many subgenres there, but it's usually quite fast, mostly instrumental in that it's very repetitive. There might be a vocalist, but rather than having, like, in a piece of pop music, the pop music centers around the vocalist and the story that they're telling in their lyrics. Dance music can do the same. If they do that, if it's too much of that, then it's pop music. Dance music is more music to dance to and not to really think about, and it's very repetitive. Rock music can be very repetitive as well, but that's played by live musicians. Dance music is done with machines. Hip hop and rap, it's not really sung. it's more spoken or shouted, and it's very much lyrical, in that there's a lot more word content in there. Classical, opera, rhythm and blues, metal. So let's look at the classical genre here. We're looking at four of the greatest composers. Not there's many great composers, but I would say that for each period of the classical era, these would be the most well known and the most important historically in terms of influencing later composers. So classical music refers to the traditional Western music, including religious and secular music. So again, like the Christian Church, the Roman Catholic Church was the dominant leading institution, and all art and musical expression came out of the paid homage to the church. We had all this hymnal music for singing and playing in the church, and then later we had secular music, which was just written by the composers for the enjoyment of, dancing at a party or whatever the composer felt they wanted to express. Classical music, as we know it, spans from roughly the 6th century to the present day, but it reached its peak between 1550 and 1900. After that, the rules really changed. What accounts for contemporary classical music bears no real resemblance to the traditional classical music. So here we have Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, and Chopin. If you know nothing about classical music, it's a good start to begin at the beginning with Bach, and then try Mozart out for a little bit, Beethoven and Chopin. Again, we might come back to these lessons later and have a lesson just on classical music. Jazz music. Jazz music is an American musical genre, or at least it originated in America, from the African American communities of New Orleans in the United States in the early 19th and 20th century. So when classical was on its way out in terms of popular performance music, jazz came into popularity. Jazz is characterized by swing and blues notes, so a different kind of a musical scale. Polyrhythms, a different kind of rhythmic structure, far more emphasis on the percussion. Classical music doesn't have a lot of percussion in it, but jazz music is very rhythmic and percussive because, like, African American communities, their range of instruments were mostly drums and chanting and so on. So greatest jazz musicians for today are Miles Davis, the trumpet player on the top left, Louis Armstrong, the trumpet player on the right, Thelonious Monk, the piano player on the bottom left, and John Coltrane, the saxophone player over there. So check out Louis Armstrong. Check out John Coltrane. Check out Miles Davis. Check out Louis Armstrong. Blues music. Blues is the precursor to rock. Classical came before jazz. We have modern jazz, but jazz went into blues, and blues became rock. So blues is a music genre and musical form which originated again in the Deep South, so it's just an evolution of jazz music. Characterized by the blues scale, specific kinds of chord progressions. Blues music, it's a very kind of conventional. Jazz is very experimental. Blues is very conventional. It's hard to distinguish one blues song from another. But blues, blues is enjoyed by the level of talent of the performers. The guitarist can really jam out on the blues scale, and the singer. It features the blues and pentatonic scales, and again, rock. Without blues, there would be no rock. So I would say that with the evolution of with music in the modern era, it has become a lot more interesting because it builds on the previous genres before it, provided they know what they're doing. So some of the greatest blues musicians are B.B. King, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, and Ray Charles. If you want to get this list later, I'll give you the link to the group where I will upload the slides. You got to check these musicians out. Jimi Hendrix, Ray Charles, Eric Clapton, B.B. King, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk. Okay, country music. Country was sort of the intermediary between blues and rock. Like blues and jazz in its early days was mostly African American, right? Mostly black. And then white people were enjoying it, and they didn't want to completely appropriate it, so they came up with country rock. You see Elvis Presley there in the bottom left, bottom right. Elvis Presley, known as the king of rock, I guess, but he's more of a country performer. So country and western ballads, it's a little sad. Like blues and jazz are very much uplifting, happy sounding, or very aggressive sounding. Of course, you do have sad jazz music, but country music is predominantly sad music. And a ballad is usually a piece of sad music. Mostly guitar ensembles. And here we have Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, the Eagles, and Elvis Presley. In the 1950s and 60s and 70s, you had classic rock or British rock. So American rock was like Elvis and Johnny Cash in the 1950s. And they influenced people like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones. And they were influenced by, country rock and blues rock. Hopefully you've heard of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. So rock and roll really peaked around the 60s and 70s. Originated in the United States and really evolved when when British groups started to produce their own kind of rock. So a rock group usually consists of a piano, two guitars, a lead and a rhythm, a bass, and some singers. And here again we have the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the Doors, and the Rolling Stone. And there are many, many more. But then you had the 80s, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where there was kind of a rejection of classic rock. Rock became very, very successful, and everyone wanted to be the next big super group. And the popular rock music became a little bit boring. And then you had this underground culture, the subgenre, sort of a rebellion against what was popular. So here we have alternative music, And the interesting thing about alternative music is that it is sort of rock based. You have the rock band, but they're not just playing the blues pentatonic scales. They're incorporating as many new types of scales and structures as they can. Other kinds of musical influences from other cultures, from other eras. It can be melodic and happy sounding, and it can also be very dark. So the metal and the alternative of the 80s and 90s is very dark. Punk music was very aggressive and angry sounding. And then alternative tried to take that anger and anxiety out of punk, but infuse more a broader musical palette to it. Punk music was very short and very aggressive and very simple, very fast and very loud. And they took all of that, but they brought in the rock and other musical elements, other musical influences. So here we have Nirvana, Pearl Jam, NIN, and Tool. These are all some very, very interesting groups to listen to, because they broke ground, they broke the mold. Particularly Tool. Tool is quite popular right now. When it comes to polyrhythms and unconventional time signatures, there's a lot to listen to in a Tool album. Nine Inch Nails, NIN there. This is where this group. This group took the electronic elements. We'll look at some of the instruments quickly. Please stick around. They took the new electronic instruments that were coming out in the 80s and 90s, synthesizers and drum machines and samplers and computer production techniques, and they applied that to rock and roll music. So that's what makes them interesting. Hip hop. It's a form of electronic music. It can be played with a traditional band, but usually it involves a drum machine or a sampler. And can be melodic, it can be sung, but usually it's spoken. So hip-hop is a culture and art movement that was, again, created by African Americans out of New York City. It's characterized by many elements, but the two most defining ones are rapping or emceeing. So sometimes it's not even really planned. The rapper will get up on the microphone and try to improvise a stream of consciousness, grouping of words that rhyme. That's the art or the skill there, is to come up with something completely spontaneously, have it rhyme, and then try to figure out the meaning afterwards. DJing or combining break beats from old records and playing them, sort of looping them. We can look at hip hop in another lesson as well. So we have here Eminem, Jay-Z, Tupac, and KRS-One as probably some of the most popular hip hop artists that any hip hop lover would want to have in their collection, I think. And here are just some of the other genres. Pop. I can't really talk about pop too much. There's maybe too much or nothing to talk about with it. There's a new group every week, I guess. Just whichever one you like, whichever one works for you. Disco and dance and electronic. I could certainly talk about this. You might not be that interested in it. But again, it's the very repetitive beat-based electronic music played with machines. Latin is a form of traditional music like jazz. Reggae, kind of a Caribbean music. So we talked a lot about African American music. There's also Caribbean music and African music. I guess our African music might be reggae as well. Bob Marley, Chinese traditional music. So the genre, what defines the genre? We have the elements that we discussed, and we also have the culture, and we have the ensemble or the range of instruments used. You can enjoy music at a concert. You can enjoy music at your karaoke bar. Here are the musical instruments. I promise you we're getting very close to the end here. Stringed instruments. Musical instruments sounded by the plucking or vibration of a string. Here are some string instruments: a cello, a violin, a harp. The plucking or the vibrating of the string against the hollow wooden body amplifies the sound. So a guitar has its hollow body and a neck or a fretboard. The player holds down the strings on the fretboard, and the closer to the body they hold the notes down, the higher the frequency. You can strum the guitar, you can pick the guitar. Acoustic guitar, electric guitar, a bass guitar. The size of the string is a little thicker, so it produces a lower sounding note. The banjo, it's really important in country music. A slide guitar, also very important in country music. The piano is kind of a stringed instrument. It's a hybrid between a stringed percussive, some people call it a keyboard instrument. So instead of, the string is hit by a hammer, which is activated by a key. And again, you have the longer strings at the bottom, which play a lower note, and the higher strings up at the top. The cool thing about a piano is that with a guitar, you've only got about, 6 possible simultaneous notes that you can play. But with a piano, it's pretty much infinite, depending on, the skill of the performer. You can play 10 notes simultaneously, but you can hold down the pedal so that the notes kind of sustain, and it's amazing. We can have another lesson on this some other time too. So different kinds of keyboards. We have the piano, the electric piano, the organ. We have the brass and woodwinds. Brass and woodwind instruments are musical instruments that are sounded by the wind blown by the lips of the player. So we have like the clarinet, the trumpet, the saxophone, the trombone, and a harmonica. Percussion. Musical instruments sounded by striking with a hand or a stick. Drums. Hand drums. The Japanese koto drums. And finally, electronic instruments sounded electronically. Synthesizers, samplers, drum machines, virtual instruments. Effects. This is a digital polyphonic synthesizer. This is an analog monophonic modular synthesizer. A microphone. An effects rack. An amplifier. A mixing board or a console. A tape machine. A sampler. Drum machines. Another kind of a synthesizer. This is a combination of synthesizer, drum machine, sequencer. A deck of turntables and a mixer. Another kind, but doesn't use turntables. Uses CDs or uses a computer. This is what a music production studio usually looks like. And so if you like the idea of experimenting with your own music production, go ahead and pick up a DAW workstation. It contains every piece of recording tool that you'll need, from sequencing notes to recording audio through a microphone to applying effects, and it contains its own synthesizers and sampled instruments. The best way to get started is with an iPad. It's cheaper than a computer, and it comes with the free GarageBand And this is where you get to play with virtual instruments, different kinds of keyboards, different kinds of stringed instruments, brass, woodwind, percussion. It's got everything, and it's completely free. If you're really into synthesizers and learning about different, synthesis techniques and step sequencing, another one is called Chord Gadget, which again you can play on the iPad. And both of these are free. If you want to pay a little bit more money, there are options there. Asian instruments, you have the erhu and the guzheng. I'll leave you guys with a couple quotes here to finish it up. A painter paints pictures on canvas, but musicians paint their pictures on silence. Where words fail, music speaks. Sometimes it can take all day to try and convey what you want to say, but a piece of music can do that in 5 minutes or less. Music washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life. When you're just feeling tired and worn out, put on your favorite piece of music and you feel renewed, I guess. Einstein, I often think of in music. I live in my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. I'm still here. I thought I had more. I guess that's it. Oh yeah, okay. The key to one's heart is hidden in their playlist. A playlist is like, if you have an account on Spotify or Apple Music or something like that. Music gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything. Without music, life would be a mistake. And finally, music is not just what I listen to, it's what I am. And music can change the world. And that's absolutely true. Music conveys the cultural mood. So, that's time. That's all I have to say on the subject. If you want to get the notes, go ahead and join the group. Next week, we're going to be talking about modern inventions. So, different kinds of tools that we use on a day-to-day basis, like our mobile phone or the computer, maybe the automobile, how these inventions changed history. So look forward to that next week. If you have any questions, I can be reached here. And I wish you a safe and happy holiday. And I'll talk to you soon. Good night. Bye-bye.